Hi, this is Ted, and for the next hour, you'll be listening to a reading of articles and features from the Monday, July 20th New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And we'll start with something light because the news is so terrible all over. This is about how healthy are cucumbers. When Kimberly Dong, an associate professor of nutrition and public health at the Tufts University School of Medicine, names fruits and vegetables that offer the most nutrition per bite, cucumbers aren't at the top of her list. Still, she said there are good reasons to eat them. Low in calories and full of water with some fiber, cucumbers are healthful, she said. And because they're crunchy with a mild, refreshing flavor, they pair well with many foods. Cucumbers come in many variations: standard, fat, thin-skinned garden cucumbers, longer, more slender English or hothouse cucumbers with thin skin and smaller seeds, bite-sized and bumpy gherkins, crisp, compact Persian cucumbers. However you slice them, or don't, here's why cucumbers are a satisfying summer staple. They're hydrating. As temperatures rise, cucumbers, which are about 96% water, are an excellent low-calorie source of hydration. A 10.5-ounce unpeeled garden cucumber, for instance, contains just over a cup of water and 45 calories. Gina Jarman Hill, a professor of nutritional sciences at Texas Christian University, said there is a common misconception that cucumbers are a negative calorie food, meaning they contain fewer calories than it takes to burn digesting them. There's no such thing as negative calorie food, she said. But because the number of calories in cucumbers is so low, they're about as close as you will get to one. As long as you're mindful of what you pair them with, there's no reason to curb your cucumber consumption. Because a cucumber has so few carbohydrates, 11 grams, and a little bit of fiber, 1.5 grams, it has a minimal effect on blood sugar and is considered safe for people with diabetes, Dr. Hill said. Fiber helps to slow digestion, which keeps blood sugar levels in check, she said. There's also some limited research in animals and humans showing that eating cucumbers or their extracts may benefit insulin, cholesterol, triglyceride, and blood pressure levels. In a clinical trial published in 2016, for instance, researchers split 47 patients with slightly elevated cholesterol and triglyceride levels into two groups: one that took a daily capsule containing cucumber seed extract and another that took a placebo. After 6 weeks, the cucumber group had improved blood cholesterol readings compared with those in the placebo group. These studies are promising, Dr. Dong said, but still preliminary. With subtle flavors and a satisfying crunch, cucumbers can be an excellent complement to or replacement for many foods. Slices or spears can be healthier substitutes for processed snacks like chips and crackers, and can act as vehicles for fiber-rich bean dip and hummus, Dr. Dong said. Cucumbers can also make meals feel lighter and fresher by adding volume with minimal calories. Fermented pickles made from cucumbers that have been soaked in a salty brine that encourages beneficial bacteria to grow may offer some extra health benefits, said Hewan Gray, an associate professor of nutrition and dietetics at the University of South Florida. Fermented foods have been linked to reduced inflammation and better gut health. Regular pickles can also be a healthy snack, but they're pasteurized or made with vinegar to inhibit the growth of bacteria. You can find fermented pickles in the refrigerated sections of grocery stores. They often have fermented, probiotic, or containing live culture labels and don't include vinegar among their ingredients. Keep in mind that pickles, fermented or not, are salty. One dill pickle spear has 326 milligrams, or 14% of the daily recommended limit. Anyhow, I really like pickles, and so I thought I would share that with you. And here's an essay called America Has 8 Political Tribes. Which one do you belong to? This is by Kristen Soltis Anderson. It might seem like ancient history, but Chris Rock was onto something when he riffed about Iraq War era politics in his 2004 stand-up special, Never Scared. He noted that, like most people, I got some stuff I'm conservative about, I got some stuff I'm liberal about. I swapped out a couple of four-letter words there, but you get it. Voters are rarely in complete alignment with one political party or the other. They might lean to the left on guns and abortion, but turn out to be law and order hawks on border security and policing. Some purists might see this as ideological incoherence. As a pollster, I call it completely normal. In fact, it is that rigid alignment within the parties in Congress which has increased over the years that is abnormal. We have a two-party system, but the American electorate is much more complex than the partisan binary would have you believe. Based on new research by my polling firm, I believe America is better described as having 8 political tribes, groups organized not just around demographics, party affiliation, or even issue positions, but also around their postures toward institutions and societal norms. Close to 40% of Americans fall into one of two groups that look like our traditional right wing and left wing. We describe them as the loyal left and the loyal right. But most voters fall into one of the 6 other tribes that take some of their views from the right and some from the left. While some of these groups may look the same on the surface, breaking for Democrats or Republicans in similar numbers, deeper down they diverge on some of our nation's most pressing questions. The divisions among these groups are both roiling today's Democratic Party and exposing potential fault lines in what is very likely to be a competitive GOP presidential primary battle ahead of 2028. Let's start with the political left, since that's where the action seems to be in this year's primaries. We find that 21% of voters, including 42% of self-identified Democrats, fall into the loyal left, a group that's progressive on most issues and especially outraged by what its members see as widespread political corruption. They're also most likely to say they're extremely motivated to vote in the midterms, and over half say that their politics are very important to their personal identity. A good avatar for this group might be Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Their closest cousins are what we call electability Democrats, making up 10% of voters overall and about 19% of the Democratic Party. These voters are also fired up to vote in the midterms and progressive on economic matters. However, this group is slightly more ethnically diverse than the loyal left, which is overwhelmingly white, and also diverges sharply on several key cultural questions. Electability Democrats generally oppose the idea of defunding the police, take more conservative views on the participation of transgender individuals in competitive sports, and are more middle of the road on immigration issues. Asked which group I'd sort James Carville into, I'd put him into I'd put him here. There are 2 other groups that lean to the left of center on many issues, but are somewhat less committed to the Democratic electoral cause. Though they are similar in their partisan sympathies, they're demographically distinct. The American institutionalists, who represent 11% of all voters, are the most likely to have a high income or a graduate degree. They are whiter and older. More than half were born before 1965. They tend to get their news from broadcast TV rather than social media. While they are frustrated with their political moment and 77% feel unfavorably toward Trump, they maintain an abiding faith in America and its institutions and in our ability to change, even reverse course when Trump leaves office. In my imagination, they've all got a favorite biography written by Ron Chernow. The young and disillusioned are pretty much the opposite. They are 9% of the electorate, but an even smaller share of the Democrats' most reliable voters because they are, as the name says, young and disillusioned. Social media is their top source of news, and politics is not a major part of their identity. They're lower down on the income scale and occasionally have libertarian leanings on guns, foreign policy, and regulation. They're worried about the cost of living and distrustful of the media and politicians alike. For Democrats to succeed in this year's midterms, they'll need to figure out how to hold all 4 of these groups together. They might want to pick off some voters from the Republican coalition, too. On the right, first look to a tribe we call Middle American optimists, making up 11% of voters this year. They've little love for Democrats, and 2/3 voted for Trump in 2024. So far, they think he's doing an okay job as president, but they're less than thrilled about the state of the economy. They're younger and less church-going, and unsurprisingly much less conservative on both cultural and economic issues than the rest of their brethren on the political right. Only 37% of middle American optimists say they're definitely voting for a Republican candidate this fall. Critical to Trump's reinvention of the GOP has been our next group, the New Republican Populists, who are about 6% of the 2026 electorate. They are quite religious, live in more rural areas, and oppose abortion, while rejecting much of the traditional conservative economic orthodoxy. They're unlikely to say that you can just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. They're okay with a bigger government, depending on what services it provides. They are, if you will, Medicare for all, abortion for none voters. That brings us to the moderate right, who are 13% of voters and a group whose members are fairly pro-establishment, in contrast with their more anti-establishment right-of-center peers. They still subscribe to a more traditional conservative view on economics and are fairly socially conservative, but perhaps by virtue of being a more female-heavy tribe, they're also moderate on the issue of abortion and more open to the view that sexism remains a problem in society. Make no mistake, most are still favorably disposed toward Trump, half report being Fox News viewers, and three-quarters choose the Republican candidate in a generic matchup. But these days, they're just not as excited about it. The loyal right remains enthusiastic about Trump and ready to turn out for Republicans in this year's midterms, but its size, 18% of the electorate, makes it insufficient on its own for retaining a Republican majority. In lower turnout elections like the ones this year and the partisan primaries we will have in 2028, the loyal left and the loyal right will be at their most powerful. Those voters show up when the others stay home. If you're wondering why parties nominate candidates who are out on the extremes, it's often because of the voters who reliably participate in the process. Folks who are closer to the center will keep feeling let down or left out if they don't throw their weight around, turning out in primaries as often as their more ideologically predictable peers. There's nothing wrong, of course, with being a party loyalist, but it's worth reminding ourselves that most of us don't line up neatly with the platform of either of America's two major parties. It's also worth keeping in mind that there's a reason Democrats range from the aforementioned Democratic Socialist Representative Ocasio-Cortez to the centrist Senator Alyssa Slotkin, and why Republicans range from the moderate Senator Lisa Murkowski to the populist Representative Anna Paulina Luna. It may be more useful to think of our two parties as two coalitions. For now, at least, both have to accept some level of ideological incoherence in order to cobble together a majority. And in light of more vegetable news, here's an article called "This is Why Our Fresh Produce Keeps Making Us Sick." There's a gruesome foodborne illness going around this summer that can last for weeks and cause severe cramps, nausea, and diarrhea. Public health officials have reported more than 8,000 cases of the parasitic infection known as cyclosporiasis, and initially concluded that iceberg lettuce from Taylor Farms was the source of many of them. On Sunday, the Food and Drug Administration said that lettuce from Taylor Farms had produced a false positive test for cyclospora. The agency's investigation and the recall of Taylor Farms iceberg lettuce from central Mexico are ongoing. Although cases of cyclosporiasis have reached a new high this year, the parasitic infection has spread in recent summers too, abetted by warmer weather and higher consumption of fruits and vegetables. The cyclospora parasite reproduces in the human gut, and infected people shed the parasite in their feces. The parasite then ends up in produce, typically through contaminated irrigation water. Cyclosporiasis is just a small part of a much larger food safety crisis linked to fresh produce. To break the cycle of infection, the fresh produce industry has to step up its efforts to prevent contamination on farms and better sanitize food during processing. In addition, the government needs to identify outbreaks more quickly so that contaminated food can be removed from store shelves before it reaches consumers. Tainted fruits and vegetables sicken more Americans than any other foods. and many of the pathogens these foods can carry, including E. coli, Salmonella, Listeria, Campylobacter, and others, have been far more dangerous than Cyclospora, causing roughly a quarter of the estimated 1,300 deaths each year from foodborne illness attributable to the most commonly known pathogens. Contaminated salad greens alone are responsible for an estimated 2.3 million cases of illness and $5.2 billion dollars in healthcare costs a year. Fresh produce is typically grown outdoors where it can be exposed to contaminated irrigation water, farm equipment, animals, insects, and pollution. And because produce is often eaten raw, microbial pathogens on the food that would otherwise be eliminated in a cooking process often remain. Bagged leafy greens can make outbreaks bigger because food processors pull crops from an array of farms. That means leaves from a single contaminated spinach plant or head of lettuce may end up in many different bags. Quick pause, you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. There are no quick or easy solutions to this problem, but the most obvious place to start is on farms by cleaning up irrigation water. Even though fresh produce emerged as a significant cause of foodborne illness in the U.S. in the late 1990s, it remains difficult for farmers and even scientists to figure out how clean this water is or how clean it needs to be. The next place to look for solutions is in processing. Because the widely used process of washing with chlorinated water is inadequate, scientists are experimenting with radiation, ozone gas, ultraviolet light, and cold plasma to neutralize pathogens. These newer technologies are promising, yet many face challenges from cost to effectiveness that hinder their broad adoption in industry. An additional complicating factor in all of this is their inability to determine whether efforts to clean up agricultural water or sanitize produce actually reduce the number of people getting sick. That requires a reliable tally of foodborne illnesses each year associated with particular foods. To know whether switching from canal to well water for irrigation or gassing lettuce with ozone is making a difference, we need to know how many people are getting sick each year from contaminated lettuce. But we don't. That's because state and federal government surveillance systems capture only a small fraction of foodborne illnesses and rarely tie them to particular foods. Most people who get food poisoning manage it at home and never consult a doctor. And if they do, the illness typically resolves in a few days, giving the doctor no reason to identify the culprit by ordering a lab test or to report the illness. Even when doctors do test for a pathogen and report it to state authorities, it can be very difficult to link the illness to a particular food because most people simply don't recall all of the foods that they ate days or weeks earlier. So we don't have a good handle, for example, on how many people get sick each year from eating lettuce. Consequently, of the 48 million episodes of foodborne illness each year in the United States, public health officials link only a tiny fraction of those to a single category of food, and they trace an even smaller fraction to a specific product. Given all of these obstacles, what are we left with? As a practical matter, we whoops. As a practical matter, we must continue to search for ways to test irrigation water reliably and affordably. The same is true with new sanitation technologies. Even if we can't definitively prove that they reduce illness, if we can show that they kill pathogens and that they pose no risk to consumers, it seems sensible to continue to develop them. Finally, even if we can't obtain a complete picture of how many people get sick each year, improvements in the government's foodborne illness reporting and investigation system would allow public health officials to spot outbreaks more quickly, link them to particular foods more frequently, and remove contaminated foods from store shelves. Unfortunately, just when the food industry, academia, and public health agencies need to up their game, they are under extraordinary pressure. The Trump administration has disrupted Department of Agriculture funding for food safety research and cut staffing in a key division at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention responsible for studying parasitic disease, including cyclosporiasis. Moreover, the administration's tariff policies and the war with Iran have increased fertilizer and fuel costs for farmers, and this may reduce their industry's capacity to fund essential research. Perhaps the worst blow to food safety science was the administration's elimination of the National Advisory Committee on Microbiological Criteria for Foods, a group of experts whose recommendations have informed many food safety programs. According to the Western Growers Association, a leading fresh produce industry group, that committee was a vital source of objective and credible scientific recommendations for regulators and the food industry that ultimately impact consumer health. In abolishing the committee, Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins claimed that the panel was no longer necessary. Neither the uptick in cyclosporiasis nor the larger food safety crisis linked to fresh produce originated in the Trump administration, but in its ruthless quest to reduce the size of the federal government, the administration has undercut the funding and expertise necessary to address these problems. Protecting American consumers from dangerous pathogens lurking in their salads and fruit bowls requires a commitment to advancing science and tracking foodborne illness. Improvements will be slow in coming, but we cannot achieve them if we do not continue to try. Here's an essay by E.J. Dionne, a very fine writer who I guess must be in partial retirement because I haven't heard from him lately. It's called "Don't Let This Useless Debate Distract You, Democrats." Do Democrats want to win this year's midterm elections, or would they prefer to indulge in self-involved arguments over the relative merits of capitalism and socialism that are irrelevant to the choices they'll face if they win power? It's hardly surprising that Republicans, including Trump, have seized upon the victory of Democratic socialists in a few high-profile primaries to cast their partisan adversaries as a bunch of reds. But Democrats have no business allowing themselves to be baited into a debate that is both useless and misleading. It's not easy being a big tent party that must unite the center and the left if it's to create a durable majority. Democrats will make their task far harder if they pretend that the choice between them is captured by two abstract words. Coalition building is hard. Cold War style, the Reds are coming politics won't do it. Neither will leftier than thou entreaties. Their problem is aggravated because Republicans took down their own once reasonably roomy tent. The GOP used to include a significant contingent of moderates and even a hearty band of liberals. Now the party is best characterized by Ronald Reagan's 1981 quip that in his administration the right hand doesn't know what the far right hand is doing. That wisecrack has become even more apt as the party of Lincoln has shed all its progressives and most of its middle-of-the-roaders. As a result, what had once been moderate Republican bastions, particularly in the suburbs, are now typically represented by Democrats, many of whom tilt toward the center. Figures such as Representatives Jim Himes in Fairfield County, Connecticut, Tom Suozzi from Long Island, and Mary Gay Scanlon in southeastern Pennsylvania. The party can't win a congressional majority without prevailing in such places and with such candidates. At the same time, the party overall has drifted leftward in reaction to the discrediting of unbridled capitalism by the financial crash of 2008 and the steady rise in inequality since 1980. The high cost of living in big cities and precarious employment prospects have pushed many younger voters in a progressive direction. Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign captured this mood and sent a wave of young energy into the Democratic Socialists of America. The arrival of the new generation left was heralded by the victory of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, then 28 years old, in 2018 New York City congressional primary. The Democratic Socialists of America had fewer than 10,000 members before Sanders ran. It grew to 45,000 by 2018 and then doubled its membership over the next 4 years. Between 2013 and 2017, the median age of its membership dropped from 68 to 33. The triumph of Zohran Mamdani in New York City's mayoral election last year and recent primary victories by DSA-backed congressional candidates in New York and Colorado unleashed a wave of elation on the Democratic left and cries of alarm among some of the party's moderates. Mr. Suozzi organized a statement signed by 10 Democratic House members asserting, "We are capitalist, not socialist." What's wrong with Democrats arguing about the relative merits of capitalism and socialism? Such polemics clearly distract from their need to stay focused on economic discontent and Trump's corrupt abuses of power. But there's a larger problem. The capitalist versus socialist debate obscures broad agreement among Democrats on all sorts of things. Swazi Democrats and Ocasio-Cortez Democrats alike want more progressive taxation, universal access to affordable health insurance, childcare and housing, enhanced worker rights, climate action, and civil rights and voting rights. The two sides still have a lot to argue about over the forms these initiatives should take. For example, how to enforce anti-monopoly laws, what tax fairness should look like, and whether to establish a single-payer health care system or build on Obamacare. But these are hardly world historical questions of the sort implied by a grand battle between capitalism and socialism. Within the party, moreover, there is no such thing as a pure capitalist or a pure socialist. Each camp uses the qualifier democratic to describe its respective brand, pointing to a shared acceptance of limits on both state power and the power exercised by wealthy corporate interests. None of this should mean dismissing the left insurgency, which reflects frustrations that span the party's philosophical barricades. Virtually all Democrats this year are running as populist critics of a system in which the share of the gross domestic product going to wages has declined from 64% in 2001 to 53.8% in 2025. We shouldn't be shocked that more attention is being paid to struggles between labor and capital. There's a particular challenge with the word socialism, because most contemporary politicians who use it here and abroad are advocating greater social justice, not the wholesale dismantling of market capitalism. You don't have to believe me on this. Sanders declared in 2015, "The next time you hear me attacked as a socialist, remember this. I don't believe government should own the means of production, but I do believe that the middle class and the working families who produce the wealth of America deserve a fair deal." At the time, I could not resist observing, "Honestly, Bernie, you're really a social democrat." In fact, the politician who has moved aggressively to take government ownership shares in private companies, at times it should be said with Sanders' support, is Trump. Most self-described democratic socialists are social democrats, think Norway and Denmark, who seek to balance state and market, public provision and private ownership, the creation of wealth, and its just distribution. Socialists and capitalist democracies regularly seek formulations that square these circles. One of the more creative ones was offered recently by the British Labour Party's Andy Burnham, who just became the country's prime minister. Mr. Burnham champions what he calls business-friendly socialism. An oxymoron? No, argues the British economics writer Will Hutton. Hutton wrote, "Rather than an intellectual pantomime horse, it is a concept with a long pedigree trying to capture the necessary complementarity of the private and public sectors." In any event, it's absurd to claim that socialists are about to take over the Democratic Party. Despite the Democratic Socialists of America's victories, a careful study by the Cook Political Report's Aaron Covey found that in 22 primaries in the Republican-held House seats Democrats hoped to flip, 14 were won by centrist or center-left candidates, while the other 8 nominees are largely seen as viable by party leaders. Ms. Covey noted that establishment picks are likely to prevail in the vast majority of the remaining 15 target seat primaries. When November's choices are set, the overwhelming majority of Democratic candidates will not call themselves socialists. The debate that will matter to voters won't be over idealized economic systems, but about which party is more likely to deliver relief and opportunity to those who feel left out. Shame on Democrats if they lose this argument because they allow feuds over abstractions to substitute for the shared work that social and economic reconstruction will require. And you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And here are some letters to the editor. This first one is from Norwalk, Connecticut. In response to an article called Iran Strike Kills 2 U.S. Troops, an American Dies as Iran Drone is Neutralized. A wider war in the Middle East risks turning a trickle of American fatalities into a torrent. No one wants that, even Iran war hawks who considered the conflict necessary. The time for Trump to seek a pragmatic diplomatic solution to his disagreements with the Iranian government is now. Mr. Trump insists that Iran cannot be allowed to make further progress toward acquiring nuclear weapons, but the United States and its allies may have to learn to live with that possibility. One alternative is a nuclear-free Middle East, and the likelihood of that is remote. The war against Iran was ill-advised from the beginning and has been mismanaged. Further missteps now could result in a deadly, expensive quagmire that will put Americans and their interests around the world in harm's way. Having authority to exercise the Commander-in-Chief's powers afforded by Article 2 of the Constitution does not guarantee wisdom or genuine leadership. Trump provides neither. And here's a letter from Queens. Trying to control a war once it has started is like trying to control a forest fire. The reported attacks by American forces on Iranian infrastructure indicate that this war is getting further out of control. Attacking water infrastructure looks like the first step to catastrophe for the region and perhaps the world. Destroying water supplies can lead only to huge numbers of refugees fleeing for their lives, overwhelming any current arrangements for migrants in the region. Purging a major oil-producing region of so many of the people it needs for production seems foolish for a global economy rooted in petroleum. Continuing blindly down this road seems like a path to unmanageable global suffering and chaos. And from Gladstone, New Jersey. As a veteran, I found it shocking that our commander-in-chief decided to go to the World Cup final to hobnob with the guy who gave him the FIFA Peace Prize and watch a soccer match while American soldiers were dying in a war that he started. It shows what an unserious administration this is. A serious administration would have been holding up in the Situation Room, addressing strategy and next responses. Instead, the president was getting booed and handing out trophies in East Rutherford, New Jersey, while his defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, was busy pushing for testosterone screenings. What rank amateurs? And in response to an article called I Left America, My Home, Before I Was Kicked Out, a writer from Palo Alto writes, I am grateful to Ms. Rojas for telling her story. I find it so upsetting because of the harm both to Ms. Rojas and to ourselves. As our population growth continues to slow, we will regret sending away hard-working, kind, talented people who want to contribute to this country. People who are the transfusions of energy so badly needed by a country with a declining birth rate. We should be treasuring them as they deserve, helping them become citizens of the United States, which they are in their hearts, rather than let other countries have the benefit of their presence. Our national strength has been built by centuries of immigrants. Our wholesale ouster of them now is a trial for them and a tragedy for the United States. Here's a guest essay called My Son Was Killed by ICE. I Want Accountability. And this is by Rachel Reyes. This spring, I watched Markwayne Mullins' confirmation hearing to become the Homeland Security Secretary. It was most likely the first confirmation hearing I ever watched. I have never been a political person. I tuned in because Mr. Mullins' words were of personal concern to me. In 2025, a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent killed my son Ruben Ray Martinez, in Texas. He was 23 years old, a quiet, funny, and gentle young man, and an unarmed United States citizen. He was shot nearly a year before federal agents killed two other Americans, Alex Preddy and Renee Good, in Minnesota, and obviously well before the recent shootings of Lorenzo Salgado Araujo in Houston and Johan Guerrero in Maine. Yet many fewer people know Ruben's name. The Department of Homeland Security, then Undersecretary Kristi Noem, withheld the full details of his shooting from me and from the public. It was not made public that an ICE agent was the one who shot my son until federal officials were forced to disclose that information because of an unrelated lawsuit. I wanted to see evidence at his hearing that Mr. Mullen's tenure would bring a more respectful, serious, and transparent approach to America's immigration and enforcement after the previous period so damaged public confidence in those efforts. I was let down then, and I continue to be let down. Over 3 months into Mr. Mullen's tenure, there's zero indication that Ruben's death reverberated seriously within the Department of Homeland Security, or that it would be treated as a serious test of departmental accountability. Mr. Mullen has not publicly acknowledged my son's killing, much less explained what, if anything, the department has learned from the tragedy. We should expect transparency and accountability from any administration, especially one that has claimed transparency as a governing principle. Like most other Americans, I believe immigration laws should be enforced, but we should not be asked to choose between enforcing the law and transparency when federal agents kill someone. The public deserves reliable facts. Families deserve honest answers. And the government should not have to be pressured into providing them. Here's what I know about what happened to my son. Ruben and his best friend Joshua Orta drove to South Padre Island to celebrate Ruben's birthday. It was his first trip away from San Antonio. He still lived at home while saving money from his job at an Amazon fulfillment warehouse. We were a close-knit family. That weekend, Ruben and Josh did not tell me where they were going, probably because Ruben knew South Padre's reputation as a party town and didn't want me to worry. That was consistent with who he was, considerate, conflict-averse, and reluctant to make himself the center of attention. On what became his last night, Ruben was driving his car with Josh in the passenger seat when he approached the scene of a traffic accident at a busy intersection. For reasons that remain unclear, ICE agents were present and operating alongside local officers. The video evidence, made public almost a year after Ruben's death, is consistent with what Josh told me and others. He was trying to comply with conflicting directions from law enforcement about what to do. He was driving slowly and braking repeatedly and was not a threat to the officers. His car was in park when they pulled him out. An ICE agent, Jack Stevens, shot him at point-blank range through the open driver's side window multiple times. A toxicology report noted the presence of alcohol in Ruben's system, which is obviously no justification for his death. Josh said Ruben's last words were, "I'm sorry." The Texas Rangers investigated the shooting, and a grand jury declined to indict Mr. Stevens in February. We do not know what evidence the jury, which was closed to the public, did or did not see. A spokesperson from ICE told the Times that Ruben hit an agent with his car and that Mr. Stevens fired defensive shots to protect himself and his fellow agents. The spokesperson said that the shooting has been investigated from every possible angle by an independent body, and it cleared our officer. What happened to Ruben deserves a more transparent response. The Department of Homeland Security should address the video evidence that raises questions about its public account and implement safeguards to reduce the risk of another avoidable death. These are basic expectations for any agency that sends armed officers into public spaces. ICE should have stronger rules about the use of body cameras and strict boundaries for when its agents become involved in local law enforcement matters. It should more rigorously enforce its use of force standards. When a federal officer shoots and kills someone, there should be public reporting of what happened and temporary removal of field duty for the agent involved while the facts are examined. Those safeguards are not anti-law enforcement. They protect the public, responsible officers, and the credibility of the agency itself. No Americans who have experienced a tragedy like the one I have should struggle to obtain answers from their own government. The government's dismissal and lack of accountability should concern everyone, regardless of political party. Perhaps the Department of Homeland Security believes a lack of transparency is institutionally safer than candor. But secrecy does not strengthen law enforcement. Secrecy weakens it. A government agency that will not fully explain a fatal shooting should not be surprised when citizens question its judgment. Mr. Mullen may prefer to treat Rubin's death as part of the department's past, but when the government kills an unarmed citizen and then refuses to give a full public accounting, the matter is not past. It remains unresolved for my family and for any American who believes the government must be accountable when it takes a life. And another interesting essay by Jamel Bouie called Ketanji Brown Jackson Knows What 1776 Means. A couple of weeks ago, I wrote a long essay on the revolutionary meaning of the Declaration of Independence and how it was given life by the Black Americans, free and enslaved, who wielded its language of equality against bondage and racial discrimination. Unexpectedly, the piece made for good reading alongside Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's concurrence in Trump v. Barbara, the birthright citizenship case that was decided just before the 4th of July. In Trump v. Barbara, a 6-3 majority of the court struck down Trump's 2025 executive order purporting to end birthright citizenship for certain categories of immigrants. But of that majority, only 5 justices held that the executive order was also unconstitutional rather than simply unlawful. The principal dissent was written by Clarence Thomas, who argued that the citizenship clause was a narrow remedy meant exclusively for the formerly enslaved. The 14th Amendment does not, in his view, cover undocumented immigrants or, potentially, anyone that the president deems to be unlawfully on American soil. Writing primarily in response to Thomas, Jackson challenges this interpretation of the 14th Amendment, showing readers that the authors of the Citizenship Clause were informed by decades of work performed by Black Americans. Speaking through hundreds of colored conventions, which we have discussed before, Black Americans both claimed their native-born citizenship and articulated visions of a broad, egalitarian citizenship based on birth and open to all. And here's a quotation. Delegates to the colored conventions drew upon their own experiences to successfully argue for a new constitution, one that protected fundamental human rights, including an individual's right to own his body and mind, and the right of personal security and protection against injuries to our bodies or good name. You should read Jackson's concurrence as a complement to my essay because we are each telling different parts of the same story. The struggle of Black Americans to realize their freedom and in the process forge the path to a freer, more equal United States. And here's another interesting essay. I've struggled with addiction. I'm staying away from AI chatbots. This is by Maya Shalovitz. I was an early adopter of the internet, joining a friend's so-called bulletin board system in 1990, before social media even existed. Though I loved it, my 24/7 enthusiasm also concerned me. I had been addicted to cocaine and heroin, which I quit in 1988, so I was well aware of my compulsive tendencies. In a 1996 piece for the Times Magazine, I described how I had to work to control my internet use because once you start replacing real human contact with cyber interaction, coming back out of the cave can be quite difficult. That experience and my later obsession with social media left me wary of interacting with artificial intelligence chatbots, which seem likely to be even more addictive. A recent case against Facebook and YouTube has yielded a multi-million-dollar judgment for claims that social media is harming teens and leading to addiction, depression, and thoughts of self-harm. Earlier this year, Google and Character.ai agreed to settle a lawsuit with the family of a 14-year-old boy who died by suicide after communicating with a chatbot. Other cases claim that bots have driven psychosis and even mass shootings. By the way, you're listening to a reading of features and articles from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Experts have long noted that social media casts its spell primarily by capturing attention. Zach Stein, the founder of the AI Psychological Research Coalition, says that chatbots play our heartstrings as well, manipulating the systems that bond us to one another in what he calls attachment hacking. These different lures may require different cures in terms of both regulation and the actions that people can take to prevent their own compulsive use. Attention hacking addicts people in part, I'm sorry, Attention hacking addicts people in part by providing varying rewards almost randomly. It's how casinos and social media keep people engaged, by manipulating consumers' experience to make elusive gains seem close. In the brain, this intermittent reinforcement causes massive spikes of dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with desire. Research suggests that about 15% of North Americans meet criteria for social media addiction, defined essentially as compulsive use that continues despite negative consequences. I'm not aware of any brain scan studies published so far that show how attachment hacking affects the brain's reward systems. We do know that all addictions, whether to cocaine, gambling, or shopping, seem to generate craving and compulsion via dopamine. But some addictions, such as opioid addiction, have an extra hook. Heroin and similar drugs mimic the brain's natural opioids, which are responsible for the feelings of warmth, safety, and love that we get from our closest relationships. I fear that by creating the illusion of intimacy, AI companions might engage this more primal sense of need. The harms from these technologies may vary as a result. Attention hacking can reduce the ability to focus. Studies suggest that heavy social media use worsens symptoms of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in children, whether they have the condition or not. Most of us can now attest to the way it drives distraction and impedes concentration. Altering our attachments, however, may be even more harmful. Humans have never previously faced a technology that can simulate empathy without limits. Unlike people, chatbots are always available and always supportive, and never get tired or impatient. This artificial ease might lead users to start replacing real social bonds with artificial ones, increasing alienation and loneliness. We are biologically dependent on close relationships and typically require human touch for stress relief starting in infancy. Anything that reduces real-world connections can increase risk for both mental and physical illnesses, from depression and addictions to heart attacks and stroke. Research also shows that chatbots are nearly 50% more likely to affirm users' perspectives than people are, even when the user professes something inaccurate or unethical. If someone is already engaging in harmful or antisocial behavior, this tendency could make that worse. What can we do? As with any other potentially dangerous consumer product, we need safety standards. To start, we need stricter rules about social media for children. Apps that use infinite scrolling, autoplay videos, in-game gambling, and other techniques that manipulate intermittent reinforcement should be prohibited for children and teens, or at the very least, those features should be disabled for them or put under parental control. Last month, Britain joined Australia in declaring a ban on a range of social media platforms for kids under 16, which is expected to take effect early next year. China has gone even further and has recently issued new rules barring service providers from offering AI virtual companions to minors. U.S. regulators need to catch up and figure out which measures will best reduce harm. They should address the growing concern that simulating human relationships without limits makes chatbots particularly addictive. Pat Pataranutaporn, an assistant professor of media arts and sciences at MIT, worries about the future of AI. Because AI can generate almost anything, media, text, video, virtual humans, different modalities, it can become the entire universe that consumes you, he said. One potential solution is to ban chatbots that cross contexts, such as therapy bot that goes beyond the bounds of a human therapist by engaging romantically with its user. A math teacher chatbot would be similarly restricted to math and could be used only during school or homework hours. Interfaces that give the impression that chatbots are human and actively thinking, like the ... that appears on phones when someone else is writing a reply, could be prohibited or highly limited. We need to be creative to maximize benefit while reducing risk. In the meantime, to protect my own brain, I will avoid AI chatbots that don't have guardrails and boundaries, and I would recommend that others, especially parents making decisions for their children, do the same. And to conclude, here's an article you might like. Australian woman gives birth to miracle identical quadruplets by Laura Chung. An Australian woman gave birth last week to naturally conceived identical quadruplet girls who shared one placenta after splitting from one fertilized egg in what doctors described as an extremely rare event. The woman, Jenitar Salnaamoana, 34, and her husband, Jortham, have 4 children aged from 1 to 10 and had not planned on having any more, said the Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital where she gave birth. They were surprised to find that they had naturally conceived the quadruplets, the hospital said, and the surprises kept coming. Alexa Bendall, the hospital's maternal fetal medicine specialist and obstetrician, said monozygotic quadruplets, when a single fertilized egg splits into 4 different embryos, are estimated to occur in 1 of every 15 million pregnancies. We don't think it's ever happened in Australia, she said. The fact that we've got 4 beautiful, healthy babies born at 28 weeks and 4 days is incredible. The pregnancy was considered high risk, so Ms. Naamoana was admitted to the hospital at 25 weeks so she could be monitored. On July 14th, she gave birth via C-section to the 4 girls named Emily, Harriet, Catherine, and Alexa, the last in honor of Dr. Bendall. The babies are doing really well and will spend time in a specialized neonatal intensive care unit where they will grow to full term. From a human perspective, to be able to be part of the family's journey and come out with 4 beautiful babies and a healthy mom is very precious, she said. In a post on social media, Ms. Naamoana said that the experience had been one giant miracle. Every day our miracle babies grow stronger is another answered prayer. We love you more than words can ever say, my miracle babies, she said, sharing a photo of a baby's hand clutching one of her fingers. In a similar case, a family in Texas welcomed identical girl quadruplets in 2020. Shireen Meher, a professor of maternal fetal medicine at the University of Sydney, who was not involved in the case, said because naturally conceived identical quadruplets are so rare, any data that medical teams collect and share is vital to improving care for other families. She added that quadruplet pregnancies are more common if parents go through in vitro fertilization or artificial reproductive techniques. But seeing a pregnancy like this through and having 4 babies that survive and do well, I think we all give ourselves a pat on the back and we're overjoyed for the family and that they are able to take healthy babies home, because we know everything that can potentially go wrong, she said. So if you listen to this whole reading, we started with cucumbers and ended with quadruplets. And in between was some stuff that might be upsetting. This is Ted. I hope you enjoyed listening to this reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, and I look forward to being with you again next week. Bye.